Of the wide range of creatures that inhabit Midgard, most of them come under one of the four major categories. Namely, mankind, monsters, demons, and uncla.s.sified. First off, mankind incompa.s.ses humans, flugels, dwarves, elves, halflings, vampires, and beastmen, otherwise known as the seven great races. The requirements of being part of this category are, well, completely subjective. Although you could argue all of them are bipedal, so are goblins and orcs. However, due to their low intelligence, they are lumped together with monsters. It's a matter of value, I think. Which leads us to the next category, monsters. This word refers to all living things altered by mana outside of the seven great races. Such creatures are born from normal animals, which evolve from excess mana intake. Although elves, dwarves, halflings, and beastmen are fabled descendants of magically altered humans, they are by no means monsters. Again, it's difficult to know where to draw the line. There's little to know about demonkind. Even within the game, there was but a vague description of the demon race. Midgard doctrine told of an eighth race of mankind, close relatives of vampires. Despite their magical nature, they are in no way comrades of monsters. However, their superior taming abilities was an important balance to the game. Okay, I take that back. Demon monster tamers were cheaters. A horde of 100 monsters could be treated as a single familiar under a demon tamer. Goblin x 100? So is it one monster or 100? I don't see why summoning Heavenly Stars x 12 doesn't work the same way. But I will cut my complaints short, for I have yet to introduce the fourth category, the uncla.s.sified. This one's pretty self-explanatory. Creatures that don't fit into any category, normal animals, are listed as uncla.s.sified. Since livestock and insects had little to do with gameplay, they were all but lumped into a single, vague category. Most resemble the animals of Earth and served an essential addition to Xgate Online's beautiful scenery. As one would expect, Aries is a monster. But while it's common sense to a.s.sum monster tamers tame monsters, the actual skill is pretty diverse. In reality, all hostile NPCs can be turned into familiars, even humanoid ones, like vampires or dark elves. Players who sought after such familiars were commonly known as human tamers, often calling bandits and pirates to their aid. That aside, Aries is an obvious representation of a monster. Although lacking in power, rainbow sheep are hardly products of nature. Their S.H.I plus marine coats make them easy to spot, and I have long since known Aries' location. What more could I ask for? I returned the books to their proper shelves and turned my attention to Dina. She was immersed in the 8th volume of her beloved series, eyes glimmering like a pair of sapphires. Huh? You're done with what you came for already? Yeah. I've found most of what I was looking for. Let's go. Go? Where to? To the castle where Aries is. Lead the way, Dina. Dina spared her light novel a final glance before leaving it on the desk. Soon after she left her seat, we left the library behind. The time was ripe to finally reclaim my lost pet. Although I had planned to consult Migres first, entering the N.O.Ble district unnoticed has proved too difficult. I can think of plenty of ways to infiltrate the palace, but none are very peaceful. It wouldn't hurt to subdue Aries while I rack my brain. Of course. Once we leave Suvel at my request, Dina describes the castle's location. But her words are cut off by a sudden shaking of the ground, pus.h.I plus ng her off balance. Whoa there. I caught Dina in my arms, then quickly retracted them into my overcoat in a single, fluid motion. My movements were too fast to see, and I had checked for onlookers beforehand. The ground continued to tremble. Not built to withstand earthquakes, buildings began to visibly sway, creaks of wood and screams following soon after. Anyways, earthquakes, huh? Pretty large ones at that. I'd say around 4 or 5 on the Richter scale. These buildings are quite stu.r.dy for their time. Rupasama, you're quite composed for our current situation. I'm pretty used to earthquakes. This is nothing compared to what J.A.Pen has to deal with on a daily basis. However, the same can't be said for the residents of this world, their flailing arms only proving my point. I imagine this is what American tourists look like on their first visit to J.A.Pan. I stared wistfully, and my inner C*Nan began to flare up. Dina, how often do earthquakes occur in Suvel? Rarely, if not never. Seldom do earthquakes occur, huh? Which raises suspicions about its origins. Of course, I don't deny the possibility of natural causes, but this violent shaking tugs on my memories. Right. Aries had the skill to intentionally cause earthquakes. As I've touched on before, a familiar can never surpass its tamer in strength. That's, of course, excluding rare cases of extreme status enhancing. Naturally, the level cap certainly plays its part, but another obstacle lies in weight, skill management. Although players can learn as many skills as they please, the skills familiars can learn are limited in number. A tamer's total level divided by 50, to be exact. Then, taking the skills that familiars learn as they level up into account, the number of skills that a tamer can teach their familiars become greatly limited. Returning to the subject at hand, Aries was never a battle-oriented monster to begin with. In other words, I taught Aries every combat-oriented skill at his disposal. When it comes down to it, I might know his skills better than he does himself. Aries' fighting style involves hara.s.sing opponents with debuffs before dealing a lethal blow. To overcome his shortcomings, Aries' skills rely heavily on luck instead of status, a clever approach if I say so myself. Even among these skills, Earthquake was among the most versatile of them all. The area of effect knocked a significant chunk of agility off its targets, often with a complementary stun, if the generous G.O.ds of RNG willed it. Moreover, flight being a Flugel's second nature, Earthquake almost never backfired on Ruppas. Perhaps, it is a coincidence, but if my suspicions prove correct, then Aries is coming. Ruppa-sama, I fear you may be right. I just felt a sudden influx of mana over the trade district. Where Gantz is, huh? So she can even perceive the flow of mana. I flashed a quick smile at my reliable secretary, then quickly looked over to the trade district. That's where we parted with Gantz. Although the time we spent together was short, he was a rather pleasant old man. I'd rather not see him die this early in the story. Ruppa-sama, let's take the monorail back to the trade district. No, that will take too long. Besides, I wouldn't be surprised if it was out of order at a time like this. So we're in for a rough ride. Despite the chaos, I can't remove my overcoat just yet. But how else would I fly? Simple. I'll use something else in place of my wings. Let's see, that one looks good. I caught sight of a collapsed building from the corner of my eye. S.H.I plus-fting my attention to a particularly large chunk of rubble, I began trans.m.u.ting its surface. The concrete slowly smoothed itself out, forming a crude vehicle to carry Dina and myself. The finished product was a flat, triangular base around 2 meters wide on all sides. Get on. This is how we'll fly. It doesn't look too safe. Then you can hold onto my waist. I promptly stepped onto the vehicle with Dina pressed tightly against my back. Having made sure she was secure, my Esper powers whirred to life. And with a telekinesis-powered push, the stone slab rose off the ground. Another burst of power shot us into the sky in the direction of the trade district. Now then, I hope we make it in time, a tremble of the earth. And the ma.s.civ influx of mana. Even without these clues, the keen senses that Gantz had trained over decades of battle screamed in alarm. He knew he could feel something dreadful coming their way. Orders. All mercenaries are to prepare for battle at the borders. I repeat, all mercenaries are to prepare for battle at the borders. As the messenger boy ran around yelling the orders, the trade district stirred in excitement. Geographically speaking, the trade district was the most vulnerable to enemy attack. That's why mercenaries and soldiers were constantly stationed there to fend off oncoming monsters. However, the occasional onslaught of monsters never called for the aid of soldiers off duty. The mercenaries of Suvel knew this, and they gathered before the city in a hastily arranged battle formation. Gantz, who had just caught wind of his orders, hurriedly prepared for battle and ran over to Suvel's gates. Chief Gans. What the H.E.L.L is going on? I'd like to know that myself. Gans had B.U.M.P.E.D. into Johnny, a comrade mercenary, along the way. Although neither of the men knew what was going on, their battle-trained instincts blared in alarm. Today was the day they would fight. A fight to defend their country. But this atmosphere, you understand, don't you? This tingling sensation. It's finally come. The decisive battle. Aries' raid on Suvel. Someday. Anyone with half a brain knew that someday, Suvel would have to brawl it out with Aries. The war had fallen into a stalemate, but it would not last forever. It was all but certain that someday, Aries would put everything on the line for a chance at victory. And that dreaded someday had finally come. Commander. Oh, isn't it Gans? By the time Gans arrived at the gates, the border patrol had already formed an orderly battle formation. He quickly greeted the Ma.S.Civ man working as the commander. A soldier fighting for his country and a mercenary hired with money. Locked eyes. Despite their different positions, they were comrades in arms who worked themselves to the bone to defend their country. How large is the enemy? The commander handed him a pair of binoculars, quietly implying that it would be faster if he saw for himself. Putting them to his eyes, a glimpse of what looked like H.E.L.L entered his vision. Mountains of monsters, and monsters were advancing towards the nation. The Ma.S.Civ, unorganized force was slowly making its way to the borders. Well, then. It looks like our visitors are quite serious as well. Yeah, but the question is why now? Perhaps, there's a motive? Or maybe he was just in the mood for it. How am I supposed to know? Maybe it took this long to gather an army of that size or something. More importantly, what are we going to do? Are they telling us to hold that back until our main force arrives? Gans rested the huge blade of his sword on his shoulder and said in a sarcastic tone. Roughly 500 soldiers and 200 mercenaries guarded Suvel's borders, making a total of 700 warriors. 700, a trivial number compared to what Gans had seen. Once it arrived, Suvel's main forces posed a chance against that monstrosity. However, whether the National Guard could survive until then was an entirely different question. It's unreasonable, but we don't have much of a choice. After all the trouble they went to greet us beforehand, we'll have to receive them properly, don't we? Huh. So that earthquake earlier was some kind of declaration of war. We have quite some time to spare, seeing how far they are. There was no need for Aries to declare his arrival with an earthquake. To use it to its fullest potential would be to shake the earth right before his rampage, unnerving the enemy soldiers. However, Aries had done the opposite, signaling his arrival. He would invade the country, but would not resort to surprise attacks. It was a rule that the now deceased Rapazmoffel had never failed to follow. The fellow only resembles his master in the weirdest ways, thought Gans as he spat on the ground. But thanks to that, we're able to prepare ourselves to a certain degree. All magicians to the front. We're going to whittle down their numbers before they get close enough. Abiding their orders, the robed figures stepped to the front of the formation. Suvel was the very heart of magic. Not only did the nation house a multitude of magicians, they were almost all first-rate. A barrage of magic from this battalion was no laughing matter. Fire. Countless flashes of magic fired in unison with the commander's voice. It rained down on the enemy, and signaled the beginning of Suvel's largest battle in its short history of 200 years. Levia, I will protect you. Translator's note, at times, I referred to status as attributes. E.g. strength attribute alright. Now we hold out until the main force arrives. At their commander's orders, hundreds of swords unsheathed from the soldiers' waists. The mercenaries also drew their weapons of choice, kicking the ground. Although the long-distance magic should have shaved off their numbers, the oncoming horde looked no different from before. The army was simply too large for there to be any noticeable difference. Arg. Gans bellowed as he cleaved a nearing monster in half with his enormous battle-axe. His was a name that anyone in the same line of work had heard at least once. A hero of your wallet, that was who he was. Although he may not compare to the Sword Saint, Gantz was a top-tier warrior. He could defeat lesser monsters with a swing, and plunge through S.H.I plus elds and armor like twigs. Come at me, monsters. I'm gonna beat the S.H.I plus T out of you. A second swing, and a howling wolf was hacked into 2 parts. A third swing, and the living armor behind him was crushed out of shape. A fourth swing, and a diving bird-like monster was knocked from the air, dying on impact. Gah! He swung, and he swung, and he swung. The mercenary slaughtered any monsters that drew close, and the blood of his ever-increasing victims dyed his body red. In the blink of an eye, a mountain of corpses formed behind him, and it continued to reach for the sky. Amazing. So this is the strength of the man known as the strongest mercenary. What utter power! The soldier's thoughts leaked out in admiration at both his display of strength, and the immense gap between them. However, despite his unbelievable strength, he was still, in the end, human. The number of monsters was by no means infinite, and his remarkable power pushed them under. Mark my words, he was a ferocious warrior. However, his strength was but a small spark of hope against the might of numbers. Gah, Johnny! Gant's comrade mercenary screamed in agony. A panther-like monster sunk its teeth into Johnny's Adam's apple and tore out his throat. The next moment, the poor soul was swallowed by a wave of monsters. The battlefield was merciless. Whether you knew them or not, lives were lost all the same. The bright man that Gantz chatted with just minutes ago was now a bloodied corpse. It was the harsh reality of the battlefield, something Gantz had experienced time and again. You! How dare you! Wildly swinging his axe, Gantz scattered the monsters that had swarmed Johnny. But he was too late. The twisted figure that Gantz had glimpsed no longer resembled a human. Soon after, monsters that filled the S.P.A.ce trampled upon the corpse, which would continue to disfigure. Arg! Eek! Cries of pain filled the air, and soldiers continued to fall one by one. Though the enemy's numbers also fell, it barely made a difference. Even now, monsters sprung out from seemingly nowhere, and it was difficult to grasp their numbers. Tch. A human-sized mantis, an amberturin, tore through Gantz's shoulder with its sickle. Then, he winced in pain as he turned to make a clean cut through the amberturin's neck. He was wounded physically, but more importantly, the earlier injury dampened his fighting ability. Although the arm still moved, it had undoubtedly weakened. Especially in a battle that would drag on for who knows how long, the minor cut might as well have been a fatal wound. S.H.I plus T, how much longer will the main force take? Gantz cursed as he swung his axe, cutting down the monsters that jumped at him. Just how many minutes had PAS. Said, he questioned. How many more minutes would he have to hold out? 5? 10? Maybe even more? As uneasiness settled in his heart, the mercenary's movements began to dull. His wounds grew with time and muscles began to tire. This was the magical country's shortcoming. Suvel's abundant mana lured countless mages and sorcerers to its domain. However, the opposite was true for users of magic's opposing forces. Acolytes and priests that channeled holy power were a rare sight in the magical nation. These scarce numbers could be largely attributed to the fact that flugels, who made up a vast majority of these individuals, found the mana coursing through the country repulsive. In simpler terms, the military lacked healers. They weren't non-existent, but their number was definitely insufficient. On the battlefield, this was quite the pressing situation. Gah! Gantz sustained another injury to his foot, impairing his mobility. In addition to his fatigue, he could only exert half of his full power at best. The mercenary began to lose heart, and fear overtook him. Was this as far as he goes? Was this the end of the line? He could almost see the welcoming smile of his deceased wife, and the beloved figure of the daughter she had left him. Ironically, it was the thought of his clever girl that saved him. She was sure to be in the scholarly district, caught up in her educational endeavors. And so he brandished his axe once more and trained it at the monsters before him. But before Gantz could strike with renewed vigor, an enormous spear of water pierced through the horde. Wah, What followed was an incessant downpour of blades of water. Curiously, the liquid weapons curved back into the sky after striking down their targets. Tracing the magical A.S. salt back to its origin, every member of the battlefield saw it. The figure loomed in the air, its jaw reaching over 100 meters in width. Mana-infused water made up its transparent body, and its length ran around the entire nation of Suvel. As the former lake that enclosed the entire country, it was more than likely that it stretched to miles of length. The water dragon conjured by Migrez, one of the 7 heroes that overthrew the black-winged overlord, had finally entered the stage. Suvel's divine beast bellowed, its roars resounding through the battlefield and shaking the earth. The next moment, hundreds of monsters disappeared into the dragon's jaws. The guardian beast Levia, so the guardian deity finally makes its move. Riddled with wounds, the commander mumbled in surprise. The warriors of Suvel beheld the magnificent form with similar awestruck expressions. What beauty and dignity that the dragon embodied! This was Suvel's guardian deity, the impregnable defense that would lead them to victory. Just its enormous presence Aries assured its fellow combatants, instilling conviction back into the warriors' hearts. My fellow countrymen, you have done well in your efforts. The voice that followed was that of another cornerstone to Suvel's defenses. All those who survived the brutal onslaught turned to face the speaker of those words. There he was, silver hair dancing with the wind. His knowing eyes, housing centuries of knowledge, stared down at the battlefield. Spectacles adorned the beautiful features peculiar to his kind, and a white robe obscured the rest of his body from view. Although his confrontation with the Demon King had rendered his legs useless, not once did his abilities wane. Resting on a wheelchair was the regal form of a living legend, the Wisdom King, Migrez. Oh, Lord Migrez. Lord Migrez has come to our aid. The great Wisdom King. Guardian Levia. We're saved. Ha 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 ha. That'll teach them to mess with Suvel. Levia tore monsters to shreds one after another, drastically reducing the enemy's numbers. Unparalleled on the battlefield, the water dragon wreaked havoc across the war front, turning the odds in Suvel's favor in an instant. The astronomical difference in level was plain to see as the divine beast laid waste to the enemy. However, deluded by their guardian deity's presence, the warriors of Suvel failed to see what else was left in plain sight. Levia was the magical nation's last line of defense. Its appearance could only mean one thing, that their backs were against the wall, something they were blissfully unaware of. Why do I feel so unneeded? By the time Dina and I arrived at the scene, the battle had reached its climax. Telekinesis kept my vehicle aflight and overlooking the battlefield. Levia's op. 2 words that summarized the thoughts running through my head as Levia swallowed enemy forces at a terrific pace. And as enormous as it was, physical attacks did little to impede its liquid body. What's more, Migrez's constant healing patched up the dragon in all other respects. Although golems are mostly immune to healing magics, their creators can restore their health through a certain skill. In other words, a golem within the range of a master alchemist is nigh indestructible. Meaning one with 180,000 HP under the constant support of the Wisdom King was definitely a force to be reckoned with. Oh. Looks like our presence may be unnecessary. So it seems. Despite the monstrous force's overwhelming numbers, each unit averaged at level 50 at best, making them little more than fodder for a certain level 500 dragon's appet.i.te. Quality over quant.i.ti was not advice taken to heart while building this army. Most were common monsters with high birth rates, and posed little threat on their own. Even if Aries were to make an appearance now, Levia may be able to fight him on equal ground. Although the level gap does tip in favor of Aries, Levia makes up for it with her monstrous attributes. The water dragon's tremendous vitality and Migrez's constant support make the divine beast more than its level might imply. Above all, Levia's affinity with her opponent was spectacular. After all, Aries was a fire-attuned monster, something Migrez evidently came prepared for. Speaking of Migrez, I might as well take a peek at his status. Although the observing eye is quite the handy skill to have, it is far from omniscient. Unless your own level is double that of observing eye's target, only their name and level will be displayed. Furthermore, if the target's level equals or exceeds your own, observing eye will fail to activate. That said, it never hurts to try. Migra's level 500 race, elf CLA.S.S levels mage, 100 sorcerer, 100 acolyte, 100 seeker, 100 alchemist, 100 HP, 29,500 SP, 9,400 STR, strength 980 dex, dexterity 1250 VIT, vitality 1028 int, intelligence 5720 AGI, agility 723 MND, willpower 4290 luck, fortune 1311 ill status effect lower body paralysis ill status effect brand of the vanquished. Much to my surprise, Migra's full status flashed into vision. My first impression was that he had weakened significantly, and was carrying a few strange status effects at that. Brand of the vanquished, was it? Lower body paralysis was pretty self-explanatory, though. Dina. Yes, Lord Ruppaz. Migra's is carrying a strange status effect called the Brand of the Vanquished. Would you happen to know anything about it? I can always consult Dina about any troubling matters. That has always been my easy way out since coming to this world. Ah, that would certainly explain those rumors. Rumors? Yes. Rumor has it that the 7 heroes were cursed by the Demon King soon after their defeat. A curse, huh? Sounds like another pain in the ass. Thanks to these restraints, the 7 heroes are barely able to exhibit even half their original strength. That's why, if Migra's really is bound by a curse, then Levia truly is Suvel's last line of defense. From what I can see, he's been stripped of both half his levels and CLA.S.SES. G.O.D, that sounds nasty. That would mean Migra's is no longer capable of producing golems of Levia's quality, wouldn't it? I shuddered at the thought of hundreds of hours of gameplay disappearing down the drain. What a fearsome curse, that Brand of the Vanquished. At a glance, Migra's total level had been halved. His attributes also dropped in a similar Faz.H.I+ on. After all, there was no way Migra's, who specialized in support, would have a lower int attribute than I did. Moreover, half of his CLA.S.SES had vanished from his status. His former Esper and Archer CLA.S.SES were nowhere to be seen. This Brand of the Vanquished was ridiculous. Lord Ruppaz, look. He's coming. Huh? Oh, Aries. The very air constricted, threatening to suffocate the living. A staggering presence overtook the battlefield and pressed itself against every inch of my skin. Calmly, I traced it to its source. In the distance, a dazzling coat of wool S.H.I+ mirrored in the sun, scattering majestic rays of multicolored light. The ram reached 100-odd meters in length, and intense killing intent oozed out of the whites of its eyes. The creature before me looked nothing like the gentle sheep of the past. Aries of the 12 heavenly stars, my former familiar, shook the earth as he approached the nation of Suvel. The earth trembled as the enormous ram approached. The air quivered with the roars of a dragon. Both announced the arrival of powers beyond human comprehension, monsters that hailed from the ancient era of heroes. From one side, Migra's ultimate golem, created at the peak of his power, laid in wait. On the other, a familiar of the black-winged overlord rapidly approached. Tension overtook the battlefield as the beasts summed each other up. Yet, Gantz and his allies could only stare in a mixture of fright and awe as all H.E.L.L broke loose. Ruoaar. Ba. A war cry. That alone brewed violent winds across the border, sweeping up clouds of ash and dust. Although Migra's held fast during this exchange, drops of sweat glistened on his forehead. He knew that he was long past his prime. And that if Levia, the masterpiece he had forged at the peak of his power, fell, he would not be able to replace her. More importantly, he could not face Aries alone in his weakened state, and Suvel would surely perish. If possible, Migra's wanted to refrain from using Levia, as she was the sole reason why Suvel's enemies could never be too careful. To put simply, Levia's defeat would mean the kingdom's downfall. The elven hero would need to find a way to win the war without losing Suvel's guardian deity. Go. At his word, Levia sprung at her opponent, digging her fangs into Aries' body. Considering Levia's elemental advantage, a frontal A.S.Salt would surely give him an edge, or so he thought. However, Aries' unyielding expression remained unchanged. It would seem that his heavy woolen coat S.H.I plus held him from any significant harm. Roar. Aries bit back at the dragon's abdomen in retaliation. Unsurprisingly, the physical attack did little to harm the liquid construct, and the two beasts sprung apart after the short exchange. Then, they continued to glare at each other from a distance. Aries bleated in frustration, his eyes glinting with insanity. With a shake of his head, the ram's colorful wool burst into a crimson flame, which sent waves of heat rolling off his body. Mesaltim. That was the name of the flames engulfing Aries' being. It was a skill once bestowed by the black-winged overlord, and sent a continuous stream of damage to those who came in contact. It was also a precious memento of his liege, one he used sparingly against only the most worthy of opponents. Migrez, at which the flames were directed, winced in recognition. This is going to be difficult. The elven hero erected a barrier at a moment's notice, S.H.I plus elding the soldiers and nation from harm. Without it, the heat waves alone would have incinerated anyone of inadequate level. On the other hand, it left Migrez vulnerable and unable to move. Releasing the barrier would burn his companions to a crisp. It took the elf all his concentration to maintain his protection, else a stray heat wave could set fire to the nation. He had no choice but to stay grounded where he was. Roar. Baa. As the gigantic beast's blows connected, the earth S.H.I plus fted, raging winds swept the battlefield, and the air S.H.I plus mirrored under the intense pressure. Each movement sent fissures through the ground, and small hills were flattened upon impact. As the two continued to trade blows, the battle began tipping in Levia's favor. The dragon's incredible compatibility with her opponent began to show. Rather, this was the sole reason why Levia could bridge the 300-level gap between the combatants. As if on cue, Levia's next attack sent Aries flying in a large arc into the ground. Again, the earth split and shook. However, this time around, Aries was by no means unfazed. The exhaustion was taking its toll, and his body was suffering the consequences. Why, you can do it. You can do it, Lord Migrez. Victory. Victory will be ours. Long live the Wisdom King. Glory to the guardian deity. The warriors raised cheers of joy, oblivious of their dire predicament. Right there, right then, they were the ones backed against a wall. They didn't see Migrez furl his brow, barely keeping from cursing aloud. S.H.I plus T, the very water that makes up Levia's body is evaporating. I can't heal Levia the way things are going. Alchemists can repair their creations for as long as their mana pools hold out. However, as Levia's very body vaporized, Migrez was at a loss for words. There was simply nothing there to heal. What's more, magically conjured water couldn't replace Levia's lost bioma.s. Elements born from mana would inevitably dissipate, returning to the environment once they had served their purpose. Although the beasts looked evenly matched, nothing could be further from the truth. In reality, Suvel's last line of defense stood on the brink of collapse. Even if Levia managed to grasp victory, the weakened dragon would not live to see another battle. Nevertheless, Migrez had no choice but to rely on the rapidly shrinking dragon. Forgive me, Levia. As he pleaded forgiveness from his greatest masterpiece, Migrez gave Levia what would most likely be his final order to attack. Would Aries collapse, or would Levia dissipate before then? The odds were against him, and the elven hero had laid his last cards down. Migrez's heart sunk in despair. What do you think of the performance, Lord Ruppaz? Strictly from appearance, Levia has an upper hand. However, I began to explain my own outlook to Dina. Currently, Levia holds the upper hand in their bout. The dragon's elemental advantage sets her attacks worlds apart from what it would have been otherwise. Although I'm unable to see level 800 Aries HP and SP, the ram was visibly battered and bruised. What's more, Levia's consistent flurry of blows kept Aries from healing properly. At this rate, the water golem should emerge victorious. However, Guardian Deity Levia level 500 RACE, Artificial Lifeform HP, 103567/103567. However, Aries will claim victory in the end. The dragon's maximum HP was rapidly shrinking. Aries that swindling B.A.S.T.A.R.D had not only antic.I.P. aided this showdown, but also what would come after. By weakening Levia, he would lose the battle, but win the war. Despite the manic glow of his eyes, Aries' actions were surprisingly rational. I see, that would mean. Yeah. Aries never intended to win in the first place. In attempt to lure Levia from the safety of Suvel's walls, he had gathered enough forces to seem like a final stand. I thought something was off. Even if the average quality of monsters had dropped over 2 centuries, this was absurd. But Aries' fight had said it all. Those were disposable troops bait that served to lure his prey out of their hidey hole. And Levia had happily bid onto it. Aries had judged Levia too powerful to defeat in one fell swoop, and this little scheme was his solution. Aries had planned this retreat, and Migres is in no condition to recklessly pursue him. But there's more to it. Migres is also afraid that Aries has more monsters at his beck and call. And if in fact he does, the elf's feet will have to stay planted. Aries is quite a sly one, isn't he? My Lord Ruppes was the one who taught him military tactics after all. It was time I entered the show. With the soldiers' unwavering attention on the stage, I can't reveal myself as Ruppes to Aries. Doing so would also pit Levia against me. However, I should be more than enough to push back a battered Aries. It's time, Dina. Hold on tight. Time? You can't mean we're flying down there, do you? What else could I mean? As soon the words left my lips, the vehicle lurched towards the ground. Telekinesis and gravity shot us like a cannonball towards our destination. In other words, at Aries' head. Ignoring the screaming woman clinging to my waist, I sent a flying kick at Aries' head. I was no stranger to empty-handed combat. Every movement, every tense of muscle was reinforced by 200 combined levels of the grappler and champion CLA.S.SES. PAS.Civ skills made every limb a deadly weapon in my A.R.S.NL, and every swing a deadly encounter. That's why I invoked Blunt Edge, a warrior skill that prevented the opponent's HP from dropping to 0. Funny thing is, the skill can be applied to weapons without blades, or even no weapon at all. Aries noticed me a second too late. A heavy kick sunk into his face, and the enormous ram was sent tumbling through the air. The sheep plunged through one mountain, then another, leaving smoldering craters in his wake. When he finally came to a stop a kilometer away, Aries' battered body slackened in exhaustion. Which was when I noticed Migres' dropped jaw, his eyes darting between Aries and my hooded figure in disbelief. That was a close one, Wisdom King. Perhaps this PAS.Sing peddler will lend you a hand. Dina and Safur, right? Oh, if it isn't Gans. I'm glad you're alright. Abababa. Though Lady Dina doesn't look so alright. Relief washed over me as Gans emerged unharmed. Although shallow wounds riddled his shoulder and foot, those would heal with time. On the other hand, Migres eyed me with suspicion, which is, of course, the natural reaction. Caution would be advised when dealing with a being capable of striking down a heavenly star. However, clearing those doubts would have to wait. I planned to reveal myself to Migres, but not before we escaped the prying eyes of his countrymen. That power. What in the world? This is not the time, revered Wisdom King. We are being watched, and I have my own reasons. Understand that you will get your answer later. That tone, and that voice. No, it can't be, that can't. Migres was always a sharp one. That said, my condescending tone also gave me away. The arrogance was difficult to suppress, and I decided that it wasn't worth the effort. I kicked lightly off the ground, leaving Migres alone to sort out his thoughts. With the help of a strider skill, Void Step, I traveled the kilometer to Aries in an instant. Who, the F.U.C.K, are you? Aries sputtered. Oh, so it talks. I'm guessing all that crazy bleeding was in the heat of the moment? Either way, the ram was a sight to see. The brilliant woolen coat and the sheer size of the beast could take any mortal's breath away. It was difficult to believe that Aries' full height barely reached my waist when we first met. That, I answered, is a question I cannot answer at the time. There are plenty of elves serving in that army, and we wouldn't want any rumors spreading, would we? Moving on, I have a single order for you. Get out of my WA. I invoked coercion. It wasn't enough to render Aries immobile, but it would give the ram a hint to my true persona. Even if he wasn't the brightest tool in the shed, he would at least realize I wasn't an opponent he could defeat in his tattered condition. Gah. This pressure. No. That's not. Who the H.E.L.L are you? This is not the time, nor place. But know that I can give you the answer you're hoping for. The manic glow gradually faded from the ram's eyes. It would seem the gears in his head had finally clicked into place. With a half-suspicious, half-hopeful expression, Aries dragged himself to his feet. The ram slowly turned his back to me, and trod his way back towards the mountain. From time to time, the magical beast turned his head to steal another glance at my direction and smile shyly, just like the old Aries would. The old Aries? Well, whatever. Some useless information familiars played a game of following the leader behind their tamers in the game. Even within cities, familiars stayed faithful to their masters' sides. In terms of this new world of Midgard, Ruppas used to stroll the city streets, a 100-meter ram constantly looming over her shoulder. I wonder what number that did for the Overlord's reputation? Levia, do not fear. I will protect you all. Migrez, don't get too C.O.C.Ky when the enemy isn't even here. Now, it is nothing but a fleeting memory. It was long before Migrez was crowned as the Wisdom King, a time when we were but naive adventurers, bursting with Zion. It was a time when elven adventurers were a rare sight, for their kind still enjoyed the seclusion of Midgard's forests. Those who abandoned the shade of the elven canopies were the odd.A.L.L.S and outcasts of the race. But Migrez ignored the hushed stereotypes placed upon him. Perhaps, he was content with setting foot on new soils and exploring the different facets of Midgard. With every city came new faces to greet and old acquaintances to bid farewell. And perhaps, if he wandered long enough, he would come across another person of the same wavelength. That was Ruppas. And every day spent with her was pure bliss. So I thought a wider perspective would do the elven race a lot of good. If only they would open their eyes to the outside world. Amidst a grimy tavern, Migrez told his dream to those gathered around a table. By no means was it a CLA.S.SY pub, and its alcohol was no better. But she was what made it special. Ruppas sat, legs crossed, eyes sparkling with excitement. His dearest friend grinned from ear to ear, releasing one hearty laugh after another. It was at these times that everyone was within arm's reach, unshackled by their own differences. That's why, someday, I'll make a country where elves can walk hand in hand with the other races. It'll be a bustling metropolitan, and I'll prove that it's possible. Ho ho. I see we have some big dreamers here. Ha ha ha. Isn't that right? Men need dreams. And if you're gonna dream, you go big or go home. The Smithying and Sword King's goofy smiles were contagious, and soon enough, everyone was laughing along. Ruppas herself grinned, standing up with a mug of beer in hand. Naive, Mezhas. While you found your country, I'll rule the world. I'll build a paradise where no one has to fear the demon race. This time around, the group roared with laughter. Ruppa's expression flushed red with embarrassment and opened her mouth to speak. What's so funny? I'm dead serious. I'll show you all someday. Gahahaha. Even dreams need limits. The day you rule the world is the day I slurp pasta through my nose. I'll hold you to that, Alioth. You'll see. Once I rule the world, I'll make sure you keep that promise. Hey. Not you too, Migrez. Those were blissful days, full of banter, quarrels, and reconciliations. However, Such merry times would soon come to an end, for these youngsters had the potential to realize their dreams. And once they did, they would slowly lose themselves. Where did we go wrong? When did we stray from the right path? Ruppaz, my old friend, perhaps you knew the answer? After Aries' retreat, I was promptly invited to the N.O.Bli district. Hundreds of soldiers lined the bridges that led to the heart of the nation. Each stood with stone-like serenity, and were in no hurry to leave despite the obvious peril of the situation. Although heartless, it was a rational decision. While Gantz and company bought time, the main force prepared to receive the enemy. Indeed, the imperial castle is the lifeline of the nation, something to be guarded at all costs. However, such rationality would cost the lives of warriors prepared to die for their country, warriors who would die believing that reinforcements would come. Then again, perhaps it is not my place to judge. As you can imagine, the N.O.Bli district was a sight for sore eyes. The developing nation was already beautiful, but the central island brought extravagance to a new level. Stately mansions stood at every corner, giving the island an undeniable air of CLA.S. Even the people dressed lavishly and carried themselves with the dignified poise of N.O.Bility, as if completely unfazed by their collapsing borders. I, too, wore a dress under my overcoat. Perhaps, in time, I would trans.m.u.te some more casual attire. The castle was a sight to behold as well. The royal abode resembled France's Château de Chambord, albeit a little larger than the original. What's more, the combination of blue and white only added to the castle's grandeur. As we drew closer to Sauvel's centerpiece, the castle guards shot puzzled glances in my direction, but didn't move a muscle as I followed Migres through the castle gates. Oh! If it isn't Lord Migres! I was so worried. I was troubled when you left the castle alone. Well, what's important is that you're safe. Upon entering the castle, the elven hero was greeted by a pair of portly men clothed in gaudy attire. They looked like orcs dressed in clothes awkward and out of place. I had to remind myself that obesity was often a symbol of wealth, not telltale signs of corrupt N.O.Bless. However, I must remind my lord to show more restraint. After all, my lord and Levia are irreplaceable A.S. sets to this nation. My thoughts exactly. You are many times more important than the lives of the trade district. They were corrupt N.O.Bless. Although sickeningly sweet words spilled from their lips, not a single tinge of emotion stood behind them. The only motivation behind their flattery was the selfish concern for their own lives. In other words, our protection takes priority over that of the common folk. I am just so relieved you're alive. Absolutely. This nation still needs you. Ha, ha, ha. Barely sparing the babbling pigs a glance, Migres continued on his way. Dina and I followed closely behind, exiting the castle from the rear entrance. There, an estate stood separate from the grand monument behind us. I guess that's how he liked it, away from the squabble of N.O.Bless. Hilarious, isn't it? Those are the kind of men who run the country. Selfish, death-fearing B.A.S.T.A.R.ds, who only know to suck up to their superiors. So this is what you wanted to show me? Yeah. I wanted to show you my failures. Upon entering the estate, a butler offered to take my overcoat, which I politely declined. He sighed dejectedly, handed Migres a pair of crutches, then pushed the discarded wheelchair out of view. Once the elf had settled in, we made our way to the guest room. It's fine now, isn't it? I'm the only one watching, so, would you show me your face? Ah, very well. At Migres' request, I undid the B.U.T. tons of my overcoat. Slowly, I slipped the garment off, revealing a pair of fully unfurled wings. Words cannot express the sense of release as I extended limbs once restricted by my mantle. To be honest, it was cramped, that overcoat. It's nice to stretch my wings every once in a while. So it was you. Ruppaz. Yeah. It's been a while, my old friend. I guess that's one thing off my chest. Now to see if whether he is a player like me. After all, in times of need, it's great to have a shoulder to lean on. But deep down, I already knew. A player would never look at me with eyes like those. What I saw was not joy, delight, or even nostalgia. No, it was fear and regret, as if he was silently apologizing. It was the kind of shameful gaze a child would cast a parent, after shattering a plate against the ground. A player would have no reason to fear me, no reason to regret. That betrayal was staged, an act, and no hard feelings said between the two sides. Only a resident of this world could feel such emotion towards a role-played performance. But I see now, that you, too, are a resident of this world, Migres. So you, too, look at me with those eyes. So in the end, I am still alone. What, a letdown. So you, too, look at me with those eyes. Rupa's words carried a forlorn quality to them, a quality that made Migres avert his gaze. It frightened him, that his deepest emotions could be revealed at a single glance. You are not the Migres I knew. People change, Rupas. The tides turn with time, and I have become weak, both physically and mentally. Back then, it was different. 200 years ago, they were different. They were hot-blooded adventurers who explored places others could only dream of. Each had dreams to follow, ambitions to achieve, and ideals to realize. But it was different now. Now, they were tied down by the harsh obligations of reality. What once housed cyanide ambitions was replaced with the empty husk of regret and resignation. Say, Rupas, why did you choose now to return? Was it to laugh at how far we've fallen? To be honest, it was a complete coincidence. In a faulty attempt to summon a hero, I was called back to this world. That was all. It was from this exchange that Migres realized how much he dreaded Rupa's condemning words. However, in some dark corner of his heart, he secretly hoped to be reprimanded. 200 years ago, he opposed and overthrew Rupa's rule. He used to think it was the right thing to do. However, he was quickly proven wrong, as the Overlord's downfall brought the crumble of humanity, and a new era of demonkind. Even the nation that he dreamed of amounted to a state headed by corrupt officials and bless who wouldn't lift a finger for the lives of the common folk. As such, it became difficult to tell who was in the right. Now, if he had the choice, Migres would much rather live under Rupa's rule than watch his dreams distort into hideous husks of their former selves. Ultimately, they committed a pointless betrayal, achieving naught but setting mankind on the road to extinction. Who were they to call themselves heroes? Who was he, the pile of regret, that he was to call himself a sovereign of wisdom? I've seen your nation's libraries. There are quite a number of volumes that harshly criticize the 7 heroes. It is hardly a healthy topic during the critical state that your nation is facing. You're the one collecting them, aren't you? Migres was at a loss for words. But at times, silence is an answer. Here, it was a quiet confirmation. I see that you, too, have suffered through a lot. You begin to seek slander in place of praise, and scorn in place of reverence. That is. The constant cycle of envy and esteem has become suffocating, has it not? Even as your knees buckle under the cruise.h.i+ng weight of self-doubt, your revered position forbids you from venting your frustrations. Your precious honor has become a double-edged sword, no. Again, Migres' lips failed to form words. Each of her words struck with pinpoint precision, leaving him nothing to say in return. It was an odd exchange. While the victor toiled in fear and regret, the vanquished stood with the same dignity she had 2 centuries ago. Although the Migres I knew is long gone, you burden yourself with his hards.h.i+ps. What is the point? Take pride in your victory. Hold your head high in knowing that you have conquered the unconquerable, defeated the undefeatable. And yet, you shrink in shame, regretting a footnote in history you cannot change. And what will become of me? If even my conqueror drowns in his own self-pity. Satisfied with her lines, Rupas donned her overcoat once again. Jet black wings and her gorgeous appearance returned under the guise of her garments. Unease settled into Migres' heart as Rupa's expression retreated into the privacy of her hood. Was she disgusted? Disappointed? Or perhaps, did she sneer from the concealment of her hood? There is nothing to be ashamed of. Do not concern yourself with historians who criticize men of the past. They are hypocrites and bodies who have never shouldered the burden of humanity, yet think that they could have done a better job. Instead, continue doing what you think is right. At least, that is what the Migres I knew would have done. Rupa's words strayed far from Migres' expectations. However, from the steady resolution of her voice, one thing was painfully obvious: this woman didn't regret a single one of her actions. Not the war, not the betrayal, not even the defeat. She may even take pride in inciting revolution. The woman he admired hadn't changed in the slightest. Are you comforting me? Thank you for that. No need. You were making quite the pitiful expression, so I thought I'd give you some advice. With that, Rupaz turned to leave the room. Most likely, she would never return to this wretched place. She had places to go, things to be done. And if that was the case, this was no time to be overwhelmed by emotion. Migres steeled himself. Rupaz. I'll accompany you to the exit. It's the least I can do. Leaning heavily on his cane, Migres hobbled to Rupaz's side. It was times like these that reminded him of simpler times. A time when they were just adventurers, nothing more and nothing less. There's someone pulling the strings behind Aries' actions. What? Although Aries is leading the invasion, someone is using his emotions to their own advantage. You probably don't need me to tell you this, but be careful. I'd like to remind you who you're talking to, but it's been a while since I saw you. I'll keep that in mind, old pal. It was like nothing had changed. However, Migres knew it to be nothing but an illusion. He had changed, and there was nothing he could do but watch as the crones weaved their fates apart. So as Rupaz waved a hand in farewell, Migres could only watch as her back grew smaller in the horizon. They were two friends pulled apart by the wear of time. Migres was no longer the companion that Rupaz came to know, but a traitor who continued to drown in meaningless regret. It was as if an unbreachable chasm had opened up between two long-lost friends. Rupaz, it's pasta. Eat up. Through your nose, Alioth. Something I should explain: the sum of a player's CLA.S.S levels equates to the level cap. In other words, the sum of Rupaz's CLA.S.S levels at level 1000 is 1000. While it was possible for Rupaz to raise a CLA.S.S level to 200, it would reduce the number of CLA.S.SES available to her. Aries' initial size was that of a normal sheep, but due to Rupaz's constant buffing, Aries grew to his monstrous 100-meter length. Pigs wearing clothes, orcs.